the diversity of the protists. The protist groups used to be their own kingdom. But because there is so much diversity in the protist groups, they started probably about, I don't know when they exactly started, but I know at least it became published around like 8-10 years ago that they were like, nope, there's more than one kingdom of protists. Let's start breaking them up into different kingdoms. And so let's take a look at why we now have the kingdoms of Protista as opposed to one kingdom. So lots of reasons. One, in this grouping of what we call the protists, there are unicellular. Uni means one. So again, uni means one, cellular, one cell. Colonial, what that means is that you have a bunch of unicellular organisms that live in a group, and they function similarly to a multicellular organism, but there's still a bunch of unicellular ones that live in a group. So they help each other out in their survival. They behave like multicellular organisms, but they are a bunch of unicellular ones.
Is that like when we're talking about the early organisms that instead of eating one, it just takes in another one that does something and eats it? Would that kind of be?
That's symbiotic. Yeah, like. But we're talking about, so usually when we're talking, so yes, like when we were talking about the endosymbiotic theory and evolution when the one ate the other one, that I think would qualify as a colonial group, yeah. There's, if we're talking about like bigger organisms that live together, like lichen and the algae, because the lichen is multicellular and the algae is unicellular, that what we wouldn't call colonial, we would call that more symbiotic. So it's kind of like a funny, when they're unicellulars, we call it colonial. When it's a multicellular and a unicellular or multicellulars living together, then we call it symbiotic. But it's symbiotic and colonial are really similar.
Can it just be narrowed down to colonials more like individuals of the same species depending on each other, while symbiosis is like individuals of separate species?
And I bet you're right in that.
Because like for example, like with coral reefs, those are not like you just said, like those are like animals, but they're like all individuals of the same species living in a colony together in one group.
Right. Right. So I'm now definition wise, I'm going to hypothesize that you're correct.
Individuals of the same species, and with birds,
yeah.
they call it like if you see like a bunch of seabirds on a cliff that are like say all puffins, they call it like a breeding colony of puffins.
Right, and I don't know why that part of my biology knowledge is like not showing up right now. So thank you. So yes, I believe then Amelia's correct in that. Same species, colonial. Different species together, symbiotic. Thank you. Some are autotrophs, some are heterotrophs. I don't think we've gotten into autotroph and heterotroph. Auto means self, troph means feeder. And it's not like you're an adult, you can feed yourself. It means that your cells can feed themselves inside through the metabolic reactions or pathways that they have. So autotrophs would be photosynthesizers or chemiosynthesizers. Heterotroph, hetero means other. We've talked about this a little bit. The term hetero before. Troph means feeder. It means they get their energy from somewhere other than their own cells. So we have a big variance here between the two. And then most of them do reproduce asexually, but many of them also reproduce sexually. So you've got just even and there's many more fine differences between the groups, but even just looking at these simple terms, you can see there's could be a lot of variance between members of the protist groups. So some of them, like some of the photosynthesizers are autotrophs, or we also call producers. So we have a lot of names for that group. they will be greenish, which the color green, if we remember from plants, indicates the presence of. Nice, thank you. Okay, so we have, you can see here especially, you can see like the chloroplasts inside. But some of them, and this is what's interesting, you know, we often on land will think about plants and trees that don't move around, they're stationary. But this, if you can see, all these little hairs on their body that will beat these cilia, and they swim. So it's kind of wild that you've got an autotroph that swims, which oftentimes we think like swimming things are like animals, but this isn't an animal. This is a producer. The protists are wild. They do all kinds of cool stuff, and especially because a lot of them are in water, that they need to do things, and they're unicellular, so they need to do things like have the ability to swim as well. Crazy, there's crazy things. Okay, so we'll start with the plant-like protists. The biggest group are the diatoms. Diatoms are what we call phytoplankton. Phyto, photosynthesis. If they're plant-like, that means that they can photosynthesize. So phyto, if you see that ever in biology, phyto, it usually regards photosynthesis. The term plankton, when we're talking about water environments, if something is considered plankton, it is something that when a current comes, they have no control of where they will go. They will just go with the current. So they're not particularly strong swimmers, or they're really small, that here comes a current and they just, they go with the current. Jellyfish are actually considered plankton. There's some jellyfish that are like 50 feet long, they're huge, but if a current comes, because they're not just strong swimmers, they just have a bell that kind of that they go with the current. So again, plankton means you go with the flow. So phytoplankton, these are in the water environments. These are organisms that are what we would call maybe like the producers of the ecosystem. They're algae or seaweed. Diatoms, algae, seaweed, they go together. Diatoms are unicellular, microscopic. So they're teeny weeny. They're really cool shapes and sizes. They have silica in their walls, or in their structure, I should say. Silica can make glass. The other thing is that this silica, it gives them these very interesting patterns, so that if you ever did like a filtration of the diatoms in an ecosystem, you'd see all these really neat forms. So if like you're an artist, you might get some inspiration out of just looking at the beauty of their bodies. So individuals, they're individual single cells, microscopic, but check this out. They account for 70% of the photosynthetic activity on the earth. That means 70% of the oxygen that we are breathing in comes from these unicellular organisms in the ocean. So a lot of times when people say, well, I don't really care, I live in the Midwest, I don't really care about the ocean and its health and climate change or what's happening to it, should ya? Yeah, right? Because if suddenly these, and if they're microscopic and unicellular, do you assume that they might be fragile to things like acidification or heating? Yeah, right? So we all should be concerned about the small changes in temperature and acidification of the oceans, because these are fragile, just like we're fragile. If you get a cold or a flu and your body, the response is to produce a fever, and what fever does is that fever helps to kind of like jack up your body temperature, but like, why does it do that? What that does is it typically helps your white blood cells to have a little boost, because just kind of like basic principles of the world is that heat makes things move faster. And so that heating up of your body a little bit makes your immune system move a little bit faster through your blood and around your body. And then it also has this kind of opposite effect on invaders in your body that makes them grow slower or reproduce slower. So you've got this thing where your immune system gets a boost, and the invader, it kind of gets suppressed, and it helps your body. And that's what's good about a low-grade fever, is that a low-grade fever will boost all of this. But if this invader is out of control and it overcomes and it starts to overtake your immune system, because it's just like really, for whatever reason, you're susceptible to this growing faster than the boost in your immune system is happening, your brain responds by, let's kick up the temperature more and more and more and more. Then you get a high-grade fever. And a high-grade fever is dangerous, right? Because we only exist in about a 10-degree range of temperature in terms of heating, because once we get into like the 105s, we literally start to cook the biomolecules in our body. And so if we only have like a 10-degree range, every time you hear, oh, the oceans have raised about 2 degrees. We're a multicellular organism. We have systems in place to take care of us. They do not have systems. They have organelles, which is a systematic system, but not at the scale that we do.
So in my bio 111 teacher was telling us that your degrees, like your body temperature is how fast your cells are moving through your body, but she never like clarified anything on how we know, like, is there any like further explanation other than that of like how fast your cells are moving?
In terms of like speed, for example?
Yeah.
I'm sure there is. I don't know the answer to that, but that is a really good question. Like, what's the speed that everything moves through our body? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was just confused on like what she meant by that. But there probably is like that.
It just in general, just generically, it means that your blood is going to maybe like pump a little faster. Your white blood cells will swim faster in your blood. But the speed at which they do that, I'm not sure incrementally what, if it's a logarithmic rate or I don't know. But that's a really, really good thought about that. So fragility here, right? They also are the base of the marine food webs, which we'll get into that ecologically later in the semester. But what that means is that like their autotrophs and heterotrophs have to get their food from the autotrophs. And then there's other kinds of heterotrophs that eat this level of heterotroph and the autotrophs. And then there's these heterotrophs who eat these heterotrophs and these heterotrophs and these autotrophs. And we have this whole, what we call the trophic pyramid. But if you start removing these, like what happened with the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, we talked about that when the very large autotrophs started to die off, it had this chain effect knocking everybody out behind them. So we have a lot of issues here with production of oxygen and production of food goes down. Probably billions of people, I would hypothesize, around the world rely also on the marine food web for their own food systems. So directly humans are reliant on oxygen, and many humans are reliant on the marine food web as well. So just globally, there's a lot to think about here when we're talking about climate change. There's other kind of algae as well in different environments. And even within the same environment, there might be a few different, not even a few, but a whole bunch of different kinds of algae. Again, we call them producers. I love the term producer. They produce their own energy within the cells of their body. It also means autotroph. So both same. Here you can see in some of the deeper, colder systems that you have brown algae. Looks kind of golden. And they're really, really, really tall. They can be hundreds of feet long. Like an underwater forest. Doesn't it kind of look like maybe like a forest, but everything's swimming because it's in water? On the west coast, for example, of the United States, there's these forests. They're called the kelp forests. And the kelp, the seaweed, the brown algae, it's called giant kelp because it's really giant.
So the
really
kelp,
long.
the kelp is the algae?
Yes,
It's interchangeable?
yes,
Okay.
correct. And these strands that go hundreds of feet long, they provide food. A lot of things live within the like leafy portions. A lot of organisms will lay their eggs in the branches here. So there's a lot of support that they provide in addition to just being producers. It's kind of like trees in a forest, that a lot of things live in the trees. A lot of things reproduce in the trees.
I've been to the west coast and I've seen kelp that's like washed up on the shore, and you touch it and it's actually it feels like the structure itself feels like really like plasticky.
Yeah.
But when you like run your finger like on the surface, the surface of it to the touch, it's like very like slimy, like very filmy. You can
Yeah.
tell like that's not like the actual feel of the kelp, but like probably stuff growing on it.
Right, yes, absolutely, yeah, so a lot of housing that you can't even comprehend. And then a different kind of algae, it's called red algae. It's red. It grows on a lot of rocky substrates. You'll find it in many coral reefs too. This kind of algae is pretty interesting in that it will absorb calcium and carbon dioxide from water, and it'll make calcium carbonate, which is like produces like a bony structure almost inside. And what that does is when it kind of like lays down on rocky substrates, it helps to make this all maybe like sandy areas kind of gel together and create more rocky substrate or rocks for other animals to live inside and reproduce inside and find safety and protect their young.
It kind of hardens.
It hardens, yeah, because it has calcium carbonate inside of it. It's also, a lot of people rely on this as their calcium source, especially in Asia, that people will eat this in different ways. So, how about you? Anybody get up and eat your red algae today,
This
or
is probably
have some red algae today? Use it? I really, really hope y'all did.
not consciously, but probably did.
Yeah, I hope you brush your teeth, because you'll find the ingredient carrageenan in a lot of like real gooey substances. So things like a lot of toothpaste will have it, chocolate milk, whipped creams, ice cream, you'll often find it in it's in puddings. You'll find it in various places within our own food system as well. And then if we're talking about freshwater ecosystems, we have green algae. This is what is hypothesized, or where plants have, from water to land, where land plants have evolved from. That they had a common ancestor with the green algae. And we can go, this is a picture of our pond. You can go right out to our pond out there in the nature study area, and you'll see green algae.
So carrageenan is derived from the red algae?
Yes. Carrageenan, yes. It's like I'm trying to see if it's an interchangeable word, or
I just didn't know if it was from the green algae or not.
if it's like a processed portion of the algae. I'm not exactly clear on that. And it's named green because it's really bright green for all the chloroplasts inside. It's a producer of the freshwater ecosystems. So here's another green algae. This I think is totally fascinating. It's a field of study that's really been up and coming for a while, that if you haven't heard about it, it's quite interesting, is that there are people who have been doing research on green algae to make biofuel instead of using fossil fuels. So remember the difference between fossil fuel and a biofuel. Fossil fuel comes from dead things. There's only so many dead things from the past. So eventually the problem with fossil fuels is that we are going to run out. If we keep using them, we will run out, which means that then we have no fuels. So humans need to think about alternate forms of fuel. Biofuel means that it comes from living things, that you produce fuel out of things that are living right now.
What would be an example of fossil fuels?
Fossil fuel, oil, gas, and coal. Those are the three big ones. So like what you fill your car with is mostly fossil fuel.
How about
oil?
Biodiesel? I don't know,
Biodiesel, so there you have the bio in there, which means that it's produced from a living thing. So that's better. And so now, like you might think, cool, I'm gonna go out and put biodiesel in my car. Don't do that. Most of your cars are not diesel cars. And even if there is you have a car, if you come up and you find that, the 95 one,
Is that the flex fuel?
yeah, the flex fuel, you can only use that if you have a flex fuel car.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so don't like go and be like, I'm gonna support the environment, and it's usually a little bit cheaper. You have to have that kind of car. So even though you might want that, you have to go and buy a $25,000 car to use that kind of fuel, which who can do that too, right? So hopefully we're coming along. There's a lot of regulation in the auto industries about a lot of different things that are going on right now that are promising. One of the things is the research that is going on with specifically algae biofuel, because the thing about algae is that, now think about this, algae can double their body weight in a day. Imagine that you are a 150-pound person, and in one day, you became 300 pounds. That's impressive. They're small though. But if you have a lot of these small things that are doubling their weight in a day, you can make a lot more of them and more of them and more of them, which means the potential for making fuel is quick. And people are looking at like switchgrass and other kinds of grasses to do the same thing, but grasses, right, like if we think about, remember like the grass right there out the window, that grass, it takes a whole growing season, like the whole summer for it to grow that big. They can double their weight in a day. So this is even more efficient than using like grasses, for example.
When they double their weight in the day, like, are they capped out or can they continue to double after that?
And then the next day, the two of them, so yeah, they the next day again, yeah. So
I
pretty-
know all too well. I have a goldfish pond, and during the summer, I have to go in there and pull out the algae so it doesn't grow and
Right.
get the goldfish tangled in it.
yeah, algae can grow pretty fast. So here's the thing about it. So there's some good things about it in that it's a form of energy that can be replaced right now, right? Fossil fuel, it's like you gotta kill more things to get, you gotta kill more things, or things gotta die, and then they gotta compact over time to become oil, coal, and natural gas. So that's a long process, plus, again, you need dead things. This, we can keep growing them and supporting the growth of them, so we can continue to make them in time and quickly.
So, isn't it good to use this stuff too, because they're gonna be producing a bunch of oxygen as we.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then oxygen is an offshoot of that, which is great. Takes out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to kind of minimize climate change. So yes, there's all these other positive things in addition to just making fuel. Okay, so here's the thing that I need you all, one of you at least, to figure out. These farms that look like, it looks like giant test tubes, right? Giant test tubes or these little pockets that they're growing them in, the factory, the area that they're growing them in, and the processing of them, the little bodies of these algae into fuel itself, it takes a whole process, right? And you need to light the place, so you need electricity, and you need probably some kind of water flow and filtration, and so you need all these processes to take place that need structures that need electricity to run that. And so then they look at the overall like energy, net energy. How much energy do we need to process this? And do we get more energy out of this than we use putting into supporting the processing of that? And right now it's kind of like, okay, here's the biofuel and here's the energy you need to support the making of the biofuel. And this is still a little bit more than what you produce. So we need somebody to figure out how to lower the necessary energy in the processing and up the actual production of the fuel that's made. But that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to be here, because it's somewhat close, because again, there's all these extra offshoots, right? Like oxygen is produced, for example, takes carbon dioxide out. And then also we keep growing this, so we don't have to go to fossil fuels, something that's not gonna be around forever. So just the positive of it right now, there's some good things, but we really, the goal is for somebody to figure out how to get the net yield higher than what you put in. And when one of you figures that out, you'll be a bazillionaire, right? And it'll be bonkers amazing, because then we have a biofuel, something we can continually replace. We can take our need off of fossil fuels and we can produce something in time.
I'm not an expert on this, but like, why wouldn't they try using solar?
Isn't it not as effective?
Well, it's politics. And so then we get into this whole other field that affects this. And I know I've talked about this before, but it's just that there's a lot of organizations, people who just want money right now, and they don't care about the future. So, solar's coming along too. There's research, like just solar from 10 years ago is much different than solar today. And so minds that are growing here, as you all are taking all these classes and learning all these little things, and then you go out to the workforce and you make these discoveries, we come along as humans.
I got it. We're gonna buy a bunch of hamsters, and we're gonna make them run. Maybe give them a treat every now and then. I don't know, I think that's the solution.
Okay. Did you go get a PhD in hamster running energy?
So I know like some cars in California, they run off like hydrogen. Would that be considered like a biofuel as well? Or that is, cause that's not like a fossil fuel.
Right, but it's not a biofuel because hydrogen's a
Yes.
atomic fuel. I don't know the technical term for it, but it's a different. It's kind of like this, but a different category because it's not bio. It's not living thing based, but it's elemental based. So I don't know if they call it an elemental fuel or a chemical fuel, but that's coming along too.
Yeah.
So that's another one where it's not. We want it here and it's here, and so it's your minds have to figure these things out.
Even if the whole world goes like for the green algae stuff, is it like can we live like that forever? Like can everyone use it?
It's renewable. Okay, so it's renewable, meaning that we can keep growing. We can renew the organisms that we utilize for this kind of energy.
Well,
Then it gets into politics.
If we can't get water to like the entire world, we probably can't get algae from the sea.
your political science class, you could talk about this for days as to why we're not spending more, putting more energy toward this, more resources towards stuff like this. So let's just go like, cool. Let's be inspired rather than get down about it. Dinoflagellates, they're another kind of algae. Dino is like dinosaur, right? Flagellates, flagella, they swim with a tail. They're kind of like weird, funky, old looking kind of creatures. We'll talk about some bads and goods. I like to start with the bad and then we'll go to the good. So some species of dinoflagellates produce in areas like in Texas, they'll get red tides throughout the year. If the temperature is like, temperature and nutrients are all in a certain mix together, they'll start to grow and they produce a toxin that poisons a lot of fish, shellfish, and it has a dire effect on food supplies. And so like farmers, fish farmers, oyster farmers, shrimp farmers, in these areas, their yields go way down because they get poisoned. Also, if you eat that kind of fish, you would get really sick and or die. Yeah, so that's not good. If you go to vacation and this is in the water like this, and you're like, oh, it's so pretty, it's reddish. Many people have allergic reactions to it. So there's a lot of downfalls to this, like ecologically, like ecotourism as well as food. And so a lot of people in these areas can economically suffer. But there's other dinoflagellates, I know you've mentioned them before, the corals. Inside of corals that build coral reefs, there are dinoflagellates. So these are some cool like micrograph pictures where you can see the little algae that live under the skin. It's very similar to like that, the lichen symbiotic relationship, where you've got an algae that lives under the skin or lives inside of another organism, and they have that kind of back and forth. A nice home gives carbon dioxide, the algae gets the carbon dioxide, makes food and oxygen, and so they have this nice back and forth between the two. And again, it's like kind of like 90% of the energy needs of the coral are from the dinoflagellates. So let's talk about animal-like protists. They usually go by the kind of generic name of protozoa. They're heterotrophs. Heterotrophic is just an adjective. Heterotroph is a noun. They feed themselves from somewhere outside of their own cells, so they have to get energy somewhere else. So they're non-photosynthetic. Plasmodium, we'll talk about, that cause malaria. Ciliates that swim. One of the ciliates that we often work with as in schools is paramecium. Zooplankton, here's zoo, like animal-like, and then plankton. So they're part of that ecosystem that rely on the phytoplankton. But these are animal-like or animals themselves. So that's why zoo is in this word. But they get pushed with the current as well. And then amoebas are another in this group. So amoebas, the movie, one of the very earliest horror movies, The Blob, was made. The person who produced it was inspired by amoebas. I like to always think about too the protists, that if you got a whole bunch of different protists and you looked at them on the microscope and then you thought about, whoa, what if they were my size? They'd be terrifying. They're so cool. Go on YouTube and Google like protists and watch videos of them. They're wild. Amoebas have these what are called pseudopods. They're squishy body, and then these little arms can start to form out of their squishiness, and then they'll kind of slowly encapsulate their prey and bring them inside of their body. So imagine if you're walking down the hall and this big thing were coming after you to try and get you and then pull you inside of its body. They are predators. They are parasites in many different ways. If you've ever gone to like another country and you've gotten the stomach flu, probably caused by an amoeba, could be a bacterial infection as well, but it could be. There's also occasionally those, every so often we hear about the brain-eating amoebas. Not super common, happens in fresh water. If you ever, like, we're really fortunate in the United States to have such great water filtration, especially in Chicago. We have one of the best water filtrations in the world. So this is not something that you would necessarily have to worry about, especially if you do like the neti pot or you do those like nasal cleanses. They often say like, you must boil your water when you do that. I'm not gonna say don't do it, but usually we're pretty okay, especially in Chicago and mostly in the United States. If you went out to the pond and you grabbed water to do your neti pot, you'd want to boil that first. So that's a little bit different.
Is there only bad amoebas?
No, there's well, I mean, they're part of an ecosystem that are predators. And predators are important too. And I don't always want to say a predator is a negative thing.
I think it means harmful to humans.
Yeah, harmful.
Yeah, but there are some that are parasitic. So the ones that are parasitic are problematic for other species. But again, parasites are an important part of every ecosystem too. So it's hard to categorize what's good and bad, right? I mean, certainly if you get sick from something, you're like, that's not good. You're not like, that's a positive part of an ecosystem, is me getting really sick. So interesting question. But they look like that kind of. Plasmodium are a parasite that cause malaria. There's species that cause malaria. Malaria are carried by mosquitoes. So if you get stung by a mosquito, if you're in a part of the world where malaria is common, which in the United States it is not, and you get stung by a mosquito in another part of the world carrying plasmodium that causes malaria, when the stinger is injected into you, it will slip some of those plasmodium on its proboscis, the sticker part, and then they go into your bloodstream and they travel around your bloodstream, and then they will grow in the liver. They'll reproduce in the liver, and then more and more they'll travel around the bloodstream, and they start to rupture your red blood cells, and they also will release spores and make more of them. They cause really bad fevers, but also they'll cause the rupturing. So red blood cells, the whole thing is that red blood cells carry oxygen, and oxygen is needed to help us efficiently break down our food through cellular respiration. So if you start to rupture your red blood cells, that means your metabolic systems and your cells go way down. And especially if they also, in your blood cells, in addition causing this fever, can cause, especially in like the extensions of your body, like hands and feet, people will have to have fingers and toes first amputated from malaria. That's one of the things, really high fevers, and then lack of circulation and amputation. If you go, like a blood test might ask if you've ever had an amputation, for example, or if you go to donate blood, because that could indicate that you might have malaria spores in your body and they don't want your blood. So there's just like fine-tuned things you need to think about with this. Yeah, you're all like, oh, okay, I have questions.
I'm sure by now, like, they would have some type of, like, cure for it.
I'm sure too, but they're working on a vaccine. There's been some positive movement in that direction.
So is there no...
But it's not like, there's not a cure.
Yeah.
An overall, like, we got the cure.
But is there, like, antibiotics that, like... Well, this was my main question, so... is there any, like, early
There's
symptoms?
treatments. Yes. Yes, there's interventions that can help someone to recover from malaria.
But would
Yes.
you, like, there's no, like, specific symptom that you would know you had malaria? It would just
I'm gonna guess like the high fever and recurrent high fever might be a clue. Loss of circulation, you can't feel your toes well, your fingers well. So maybe in the first kind of blowing up of the spores going through the body and killing the red blood cells, that maybe it's not so bad that your immune system gets it under control. Could be like the second one where you really get the recurrent stuff where you start to have fingers amputated, but a lot of times the high fever is a good clue that something bad's really going on.
If you were to, if it was going to your liver, this is just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
would you, would like jaundice be a symptom?
I believe so.
So you would like have like a little bit of a,
Yellowish
Yeah.
skin, yellowish eyes, yeah, that could be one of the things that they see. So, yeah, there's things that usually pop up for malaria.
So I know, particularly like the United States, that one virus or whatever with mosquitoes getting really common, especially like down in Florida. It started with a Z.
Oh, Zika?
Would that be very similar? Would that be like considered like a parasite, like similar to like malaria?
I'm trying to think, I can't remember
It causes like
Zika's
birth defects.
bacterial or viral.
I know it causes birth defects that like the babies, like
Yes.
their skulls were misshapen.
Yeah, the small head issue. The endocephalitis. Oh, not doing so well here today with the answers to that. I can't remember what the agent is in the mosquito that causes Zika. But it's been a problem in South and Central America for quite a while. And yeah, the tropicalness of Florida makes it a good condition
So,
for that
like,
to spread. So
How does like a mosquito get Zika? It's not from like feeding on an infected
It's a
human.
flavovirus.
it's a virus. Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
okay.
So there you go. Like
Okay.
I was like, oh, I don't know what the
Yeah.
agent is. A virus. Okay, thank you so much. So again, mosquito bites, parasites go into infect the liver, and then you have the bursting of the red blood cells, and just the immune system is going to recognize that things, in general, the immune system, if they see any surfaces that are not smooth, it has a reaction. It will know something's not right in the body. And so then that causes the fever response, and we'll get to that with the immune system too, but all starts that mosquito. So let's talk about fungal-like protists. A lot of these protists they thought were in the kingdom fungi. And then upon more research, and especially with biotechnology and being able to synthesize sequences of DNA, amino acids, proteins, RNA, they started to go, oh, this is their own group. So some of the water molds are called, they're in the I think this is a genus, could be a family. Man, I'm losing today. Oomycetes, they're called slime molds, but check this out. Look at the microscope image. Does it look like what you saw with fungi? If you looked at this, wouldn't you be like, oh, that's totally a fungus? Yeah. So, hypothetically, would you think that they have a close common ancestor?
Yeah.
Right? So some things evolutionarily just by sight, and then who knows? But they could be one of those analogous relationships where they just, based on their environments, are similar, and they could start to have that kind of like evolving toward having similar traits. So it's really important when you see something like this, and this has been where there have been flaws in the past due to technology not being so advanced, is that they go, okay, that's a fungus, right? And then they run the DNA and they're like, oh wait, no, they're over here. They're different than the fungi. So it's pretty interesting. Biomedical engineering has so many great applications. And then another one of the fungal protists, you have fungi that have destroyed different kinds of food crops, vineyards, avocados, potatoes, the great Irish potato famine. And it causes this kind of like moldy looking stuff. Can be very detrimental economically. So interesting, I mean, we